Cineboys to Cinemen, episode 15.
15.
Hello. Hope you're well, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. To this week's episode
is war films, heroism and horror.
Ooh.
So this week we'll be doing an analysis, I'd say, primarily on two war films. Quite recent ones, relatively recent, in the last five years, I think.
Yeah, two war films that seem to have been put up against each other.
Yeah,
for in terms of for comparison's sake.
Yeah, aesthetically, even down to the posters, the way they were marketed.
Yeah.
So we have Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk and Sam Mendes' 1917.
Yep.
Yeah, we both have sort of differing opinions on them, so it should be quite interesting. And then after that, we'll do a quick breakdown on our favourites, really, our favourite war films and how they sort of tackle the themes of heroism and also horror, which are kind of concurrently running through most sort of films surrounding war and warfare.
Very much looking forward to getting into some perhaps lesser known examples. I'm always sort of hesitant to say that because people like that, they're not lesser known, you fucking idiot.
Yeah.
Just to get really into the nitty-gritty of those key themes and ideas and what the merit of both of those are, particularly in the modern age as we reflect on the many conflicts in our history and how films represent that conflict and how that relationship impacts future conflicts as well. So should be a really interesting discussion, I hope. I think. Yeah.
We'll say it in advance that it is going to be.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. I mean, we're 15 episodes in now. We should be more confident.
It's going to be the best one yet, I promise you.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah.
Your money back if it's not. Send me your bank details.
I will give you. We will give you £25 each.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Let's get to it.
Questing the cinematic void.
War.
Jesus.
Right. As alluded to in the intro, we're going to compare and contrast Sam Mendes' 1917 with Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk, as they are films that are compared quite a lot with one another, I guess because of the proximity of time that they were made.
Yes,
in which they were made, sorry. That tends to happen quite a lot in those sort of situations. And as you said, the way they were marketed. So I'll let you start with 1917.
Okay. Personally, I'm going to say semi-blown away by this film. And I do use that word semi in a very specific context.
Semi-blown away.
Yeah. I think I'm a sucker for pacing, editing, visual style, visual effects, and the way they're handled. And I think in those respects, it really comes up on top. That's not to say that Dunkirk is, it doesn't employ those techniques well also. But I just think, on a first viewing, I've seen it twice now, 1917. Although I recognise that a lot of the historical details in it, particularly, the way a message would be relayed, for example, that it would not happen like that. I'm kind of willing to sort of accept that. But the whole one-take thing, it was actually two takes, I'll say, because there's a cut in it halfway through where it cuts to black where he gets knocked out. That annoyed me, that. I was like, you're on a roll there. Yeah. Like, you were doing so well with, it's Roger Deakins, the cinematography. He has like a really little camera on like a gyro for the whole thing. That aspect of it really won me over. And the way they stitched those takes together, it just, was kind of quite magical. They used, They kind of seamlessly transitioned from live action photography into kind of visual effects, and you just don't notice it. Also, I thought the lead character, forgotten the name, as played by George McKay, I thought that was a really, really good performance by him as a kind of a genuinely. I mean, it's not often that you get 17-year-olds playing 17-year-olds. I think he was a bit older, but he still had that kind of.
He has a boyish look to him, doesn't he?
Yeah. That kind of perpetually bewildered look that you sort of need for a scared soldier.
It's sort of like the peak of that would be would be Come and See, right? The
Yes.
teenage boy's just sort of distorted, dry,
Yeah.
washed out face, just gawping in horror at the things that he's
Yeah.
being subjected to or party to.
Yeah, you could see their faces sort of meld into the landscape a bit.
Yeah.
They
Obviously, maybe he's not that level, but it's I agree with you. He is good in that film.
Yeah, I really liked it, and also the kind of the way, obviously it's real time or nearly real time as it has to be with a film of that kind of, the single take style. Mm-hmm. I thought, considering it employed that, although I do think it was a bit of a gimmick, it did, the way it flowed and the way there was still kind of a narrative structure there, I thought it was really impressive. It has a conceit to it, which effectively is, right, two of you go and deliver this message to call off an attack, right, an offensive strategy, because they know they have sort of received intelligence that it's not going to work, right?
Yeah, the Germans are sort of baiting them, aren't they?
Yeah, and they've realised this, but enemy have cut the phone lines. Again, I think there's a reason why that could never have happened.
Right,
or the way they communicated with each other, different battalions, it wouldn't have worked like that. So shaky in that respect.
Right, okay.
But once the ball's rolling with that, it is quite sort of 100 miles an hour. There's some really good set pieces in it. For example, there's a scene in which there's a plane crashes into a barn. I think it's when the other fella gets shot or dies.
He gets stabbed, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's right. He gets stabbed,
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
has to. That's horrendous. That bit where he has to sort of cradle him and just.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that kind of struck me. Though my feelings towards the film are largely quite positive. I'm quite interested to hear your take on it, to see if you can muddy the waters, so to speak.
I don't aim to do that necessarily, but I think I completely agree with you that on a technical level the film is completely faultless.
Yeah.
And the amount of work that goes into achieving that that singular focus technique is it's incredibly commendable, and it deserves the highest praise. So there's no way I can take anything away from those involved in the film in that regard. But I take issue with the way the technique is used.
Okay.
However, and I feel that it gives the sort of the backdrop of the war a slick, polished, clean feel, which I think is in stark contrast to the environment to which the war was fought. I mean, all wars are horrible, but the First World War was, if we think about the context of First World War as a this sort of modernisation of weaponry and all the industrialisation, the mass industrialisation of all of these nations, and the technical innovations that come with that in terms of machine guns and planes and bombs and gas and all of this technical, all these technical advancements culminating in this horrible conflict that just turned an entire huge parts of a continent into just a muddy nightmare hellscape. I think that technique doesn't really work for me.
Okay, yeah.
And I felt there were far too many moments where the film, in appeasing that technique, ultimately just gives a cleanliness I don't think works on a thematic level.
Okay, yeah.
I think if you service a technique so much, it does damage the impact of the film.
Yeah.
For me, and then there's a lot to be said about obviously film is a visual medium, and obviously.
Yeah.
And, the idea that techniques are supposed to obviously supplement the storytelling, I completely accept that. And I think for a lot of people, this technique completely worked because for them, it felt like you were living in their shoes.
So it's immersive.
Yeah, but I just think that for me, I actually found it did the opposite. The film felt more like a series of sequences planned for a one-take film. They crammed as many sequences together that provide the opportunity to make this look as epic as possible.
Right, yeah.
Which, again, from a visual standpoint, and in terms of production and design and camera work and performances, is incredibly commendable. But I just don't think it gives... It just puts more distance for me between what the film is actually trying to say.
Yeah.
Because I think there is... The element of the class war within the Great War is something they sort of touch on, about this idea about loads of young working class or even working class lads who go to war and are at the beck and call of people that are in charge purely by societal rank alone.
Okay.
So there's this sort of class apathy. that dictates military strategy.
So Cumberbatch versus
yeah. So they touch on it
yeah.
with Cumberbatch when they get to him. He's obviously this sort of like highly strung, hoity-toity posh fella.
Yeah, as he usually is.
yeah, and he's basically obviously someone that he wants to get the job done by any cost, and that cost is a lot of working class young men.
Yeah.
And I think it's something, if you think like Blackadder sort of satirises it so brilliantly. Blackadder goes forth this idea about, old establishment figures who have very little understanding of military strategy, given a position by societal rank alone, and having basically millions of lives of social stratas below them to play with, Okay. And I just think the film misses that opportunity in service of that technique.
Yeah.
And all of the attempts to drum up emotional attachment just feel like a less impactful version of scenes you've seen done better in other films.
Yeah, okay.
So the scene with all the guy singing and all the soldiers are sat around. I thought, I've seen this before.
Oh yeah.
The scene where the guy gets stabbed. I mean, to be honest, I like George McKay. Is it? He was good.
Yeah,
the other guy I wasn't as taken with. So when he got stabbed, not to be harsh, I thought, well, I'm not that bothered.
Oh right. Okay.
I don't know. I mean, that might sound a bit callous, but that technique, whilst commendable, I think it pulls you away from a lot of the key ideas and more fascinating elements of that conflict that probably need to have more light shed on them.
Okay.
And the best war films focus on that time. Do focus on that.
Right.
In a way that 1917 doesn't. It's pure spectacle.
Yeah.
Which I think is problematic, slightly.
No, okay, that's interesting. Especially what you were saying about the immersive nature of it all. I guess if you were to think of a film visually that is the polar opposite of that, at least in its initial scene, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but Saving Private Ryan, there are so many cuts in that first opening sequence, that really famous opening sequence.
Yeah.
And that, thinking about it, is really immersive. Not because it's streamlined, but because it's chaotic and unpredictable, and you really feel like anyone, including Tom Hanks, who is at the front of the poster. Like, you know he's not going to die, but you feel that tension. But I do get where you're coming from in that, like, in the kind of the way the cinematography is employed, that sleekness perhaps is ill suited for a war film or a war epic, because the primary focus of the film should be but in my mind it will be interesting and intriguing if they shed light on the horrors of it all, and I think that was what they were trying to do, because although the whole sort of British hooray for the heroes attitude might have been present there as well,
I think it definitely, the technique definitely serves that aspect more than saying anything particularly impactful about the nature of warfare and how horrifying it is. And again, I'm not sort of criticising it overtly for that. I have a personal preference, as I'm sure you're going to hear, and we're going to discuss this a little bit further on in the episode. But I have a personal preference for war movies that focus more on the horror of conflict and how aspects of the conflict reveal more about the societies that are involved.
Okay,
because I think to me that's more compelling than just saying, oh, look how brave this person was. Obviously bravery was there. There was a lot of people in across all wars that have done incredible things in the name of protecting their own or others, and acts of valor that should be sort of acknowledged and in some cases celebrated. But I think there is something inherently troubling about focusing exclusively on that, and I think whilst 1917 shouldn't be criticised for doing that necessarily, in the sense that it overtly is like a sort of, it's not like a sort of jingoistic film. It's not. No, it's not a film that's like, we the boys, But I think it does fall into in servicing this one take technique. I think ultimately it does fall more onto that side than it does about the horrors of the war, personally.
Okay.
Because you can't really, if you're focusing on this journey between these two characters that becomes one character, you don't really have a lot of time to move away from that journey. So, you don't get to take in the atmosphere of the war. It's more about this singular narrative, which I guess is something they were probably aware of. And maybe they wanted him to be the cipher for all that, and he drinks all that in. It's his eyes. You're seeing it through his eyes. Which, for a lot of people, it really worked. I remember after I came out of the cinema and seeing it, and I was quite critical of it. I was in the minority because a lot of people felt genuinely impacted by it. So, what do I know? But I just think that there is something in that, I think, personally, that it just veers a little bit more into that than I liked.
Do you remember the scene in which I think he finds shelter for the night, right? So he's gone into
That's my favourite scene in the film.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
The bit with the woman that he finds the
Well,
French lady.
actually, the scene after that is my favourite scene in the film.
Oh, right. Okay.
When he's like working through the burning.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was good. Yeah.
Just from like an aesthetic perspective. Again, it felt like just another opportunity to go, look at this.
Yeah.
But it worked in the context of what they were trying to do with the narrative, as much as I didn't agree with that necessarily.
Yeah.
I did like the scene that preceded that, but again, I felt that it was just there are other war films that do that better.
Yeah, no. That I don't remember why that scene.
Personally,
no, yeah. I think the scene that I'm thinking of right before that is a visually amazing scene.
Oh,
the bit with
amazing, yeah.
I think there's flares going off, isn't
Yeah,
there? And all
yeah.
the lighting's changing. It's really dynamic, and he spends a lot of this time in this film sprinting.
Yeah,
a lot of sprinting in it, which again might serve what you were talking about, that sort of aesthetic pleasure of things whipping past the camera quickly. I remember as soon as he jumped into the river, I was like, okay, that's a bit unbelievable. Remember when he jumps? It's like fucking 200 feet into this gorge. Into a landscape in which I'm fairly sure that area of France is quite flat as well. So anyway,
well, yeah.
That scene with the woman in the basement, I remember being quite striking. A bit ill placed. I don't really know what it had to do with the wider narrative of it all. Maybe
I just felt that it was a bit derivative, and I think there are a few scenes that are like that in this film. Personally,
yeah, interesting.
Again, the intention is obviously much purer than my assessment, but I felt there were a lot of derivative sequences. I also think, moving back onto the one take thing, I think it's, and this might be a reason why I'm sort of growing a bit tired with it. I think it's become like a marketable thing now.
Yeah,
it's like might sound really pompous, but there are lots of things that people who don't like. Obviously, we studied film, so we understand.
Yeah.
And we worked you continue to work in an industry that's, you work in that industry, right? And I used to dabble with it, and we've, we obviously spend a lot of time researching about this kind of stuff. So we have a vested interest, and we understand the conventions, the techniques.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't be able to do it myself by any stretch, but we have an understanding for the purposes of what we're doing now.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Whereas the average cinema goer doesn't. And I don't think, funnily enough, as a brief aside, I don't think people are really aware how boring making a film can be sometimes.
Oh God, Christ.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or any creative, anything like
Especially a film like this. I mean, there'd be a lot of waiting around.
Yeah, like waiting for the light to be right and the weather to change. I mean, there's a lot of that. But the average cinema goer isn't that privy to a lot of the sort of nuances and complexities of filmmaking. However, the one take seems to have superseded that and become something that audiences really admire, which I really respect, because I think it's about time that people who bust their balls realising these things get the credit they deserve. But I think there's a slightly negative element to it, in the sense that it almost is like a marketable thing now. Like, I remember there was a period where every sort of TV series with a fight sequence had to be a single take. I remember Netflix Marvel shows like Daredevil had to have a one take fight sequence in. And it's almost like it has to be done to satisfy people. And I just think I don't know if that's something that I'm sort of unfairly attributing to this film on that basis, but I just feel that it bleeds into that little bit more, that sort of that wider appeal.
You are right. You're definitely right in that the one take is a novelty that is wearing very thin. Yeah, I mean, Birdman did it quite well, although I thought it was quite gimmicky.
Agreed. I really like Birdman, but at points I do remember thinking, how much does this really serve the narrative?
Yeah, exactly. There's a scene, I don't know if you've seen Haunting of Hill House, the TV series. There's one of the episodes is a one take. I think Alfonso Cuarón does it really well, because he does it quite subtly. Like Gravity, the opening 10 minutes is all one take, but it does cut, and it's not afraid to if it serves the narrative. Spielberg has some great one-ers. Raiders of the Lost Ark has a really... That was before it became a novelty.
Yeah, I love one. Don't be wrong, I love it. I do love it. I don't know. I just feel that it's become something that people in a marketing room would be like, right, we need to focus on the one take.
People will be talking about this.
Yeah,
if we
do you know what I mean?
Right? Yeah.
And I don't know, because again, I'm sort of on the fence about it in one way, because I don't want the people who work really hard on that to not be commended for it. But at the same time, I just feel, I don't know, it doesn't sit well with me for some reason.
Yeah, the intention isn't necessarily pure.
No, it doesn't serve. And again, you know, there are plenty of examples where it absolutely works. But
Children of Men.
Yeah. And I think you're right about Cuarón being, the way he deploys it is a lot more subtle,
yes,
and not quite as showy.
Yeah, no, I think Cuarón is great at deploying it, like you say, and he is subtle about it, and it does always serve the story ultimately. You know, with Children of Men, it's ground level documentary style. You know, you're with these people and the chaos around them. Actually, that's an interesting kind of comparison, because although Children of Men it's not a one take film. There's about 8 or 9, I think, 8 or 9 shots, I think, in the whole thing. Yeah. But the way that the camera is deployed, I keep saying deployed, I keep copying you. It's still incredibly like handheld. It's not sleek. It's like someone has got a camcorder, and that in that respect, Children of Men, which contains a lot of scenes very similar in terms of the way what things are going on.
There's a busyness, yeah.
And so the camera is like really chaotic, and you get lens dirt and you get blood flecked onto the lens. And yeah, maybe if 1917 cut its budget by 20 million and employed those techniques a little bit, it could have been more interesting for you, perhaps, and it serves the narrative. a little bit more.
Just for me.
Yeah.
If you could cut 20 million off just for me, please, Sam.
Save it for you.
Yeah. No, I think that's an interesting point, because I did think that, because it's digital, right? It was shot in digital. Yeah. I think combining that with the camera move, it's just too clean, far too clean.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. I don't know. But
I just think it personally did win me over. I actually quite like this scene with the singing.
Did you?
Yeah. I quite. Maybe it's because I think the song's quite a nice.
I mean, again, I sort of wonder if I'd sort of made my mind up a bit too early as I was watching the film.
Yeah, no, but
and sometimes that can make you a bit hard and a little bit less sort of open to scenes that probably, so I maybe I'm being a bit harsh on that, but I just felt, I could have sworn I've seen some version of this somewhere else.
It's just, I just happen to have not watched that particular film.
Yeah, I can't, to be fair, I can't remember what it was, so maybe I'm just, I'm just full of shit, but...
there's a bit in, it's not a war film, but isn't there the bit in that Coen Brothers film? One with George Clooney, and they play convicts. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Oh yeah.
There's a singing scene in that which is fairly similar in terms of like how everything stops for a moment. And the main characters. Yeah. The River to Pray one. Yeah.
Maybe it's that. Which, if that's the case, it's completely unfounded. So sorry, Sam.
No.
Yeah, moving on to Dunkirk then, I guess.
Yes, okay.
We sort of skirt around Nolan quite a lot. I guess when Oppenheimer comes out, we'll cover that, and that'll give us an opportunity to really get into the nitty-gritty of...
That'll be a longie.
Of Nolan's work, because he's a filmmaker that certainly divides a lot of people. I think I've said this before in a previous episode, but I think people can't quite work out whether he's like cinema's greatest saviour or a pseudo-intellectual shit-flinger.
Yeah.
And I sort of sit in the middle, because I think sometimes he makes films that he thinks are clever.
Yeah.
I know that, obviously, even someone like Nolan probably still gets studio notes.
Yeah.
So he wants to make something that's as out there as feasibly possible on a budget of hundreds of millions of pounds, which is probably not really doable.
I feel like...
So maybe I'm giving him too... Maybe people don't really acknowledge that too enough with him. At least he tries.
Yeah.
Which I'll always commend him for, even if I think
the results,
that's not that clever.
Yeah. The results aren't always as good as maybe some people think they are. I agree with you on that one, definitely. I think maybe he is, like you say, more bound to the studio than people might expect, because it's $200 million films, his film.
Yeah.
So you just can't make a film like that and not have it be completely unmarketable.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about something like Inception, which is all about dreams, I mean, it's a fairly I actually don't dislike Inception. I quite like the sort of grandiose pomposity of it. But like, it's not that the sort of visual stylings of that film aren't particularly inventive. If it's about dreams, it's, these are pretty fucking boring dreams people are having. And that's a common criticism that's levelled at the film, and I think a just criticism. But I think it's perhaps should be viewed more as a microcosm for the wider industries in, sort of inherent anxiety about risk taking when there's a lot more money involved. I don't know if Nolan necessarily deserves to bear the brunt of that. I guess he does, because he's one of the few filmmakers that's given the money to at least push the envelope slightly. But anyway, I'm digressing. We're going a bit too much into Nolan here. We'll save this gold for Oppenheimer.
I think it's interesting you said that, because Dunkirk,
it's his best film. I think.
I don't know what his best film is.
It's probably his better recent film, I would say. Because it's like, it's not concerned with going, narrative sleight of hand,
twist,
it's with dreams, passage of time.
All these police officers, they were in the sewers all along. They're clean shaven. Anyway.
Maybe there's just like loads of crates full of Bic razors in there. Wrote that into the script.
Imagine that deleted scene. Like, hello.
God, that's lucky.
Not too shabby.
Yeah, if I'm going to go back up topside into the city, I want to look my best.
Dunkirk.
I think Dunkirk's his best film, because he's not. It doesn't feel like he's postulating or anything like that. He's taking a story and treating it with real respect, as people should with war films. Depending on their intention. But I think he treats this with respect, but he's not afraid to address the things that we seldom do when there are discussions about war, or talking as if we've been in war. Obviously we haven't. We'd be both turned away from a recruiting office
I'd be
immediately.
working in the factory.
Just
assembling the shells, or the drones, probably.
I'd be hiding in a bin for the duration of the conflict.
I'd probably be,
But and I'm going to just jump into a particular scene that really stood out for me, and why I think Dunkirk is a superior movie.
Okay.
Is the scene where those British soldiers all clamber inside that, is it like a boat or that metal thing? And it gets riddled with
beach boat.
And obviously most of the boats have gone. Most of the soldiers have gone off the beach. And those lads are in that boat, and they're terrified, and they're climbing on top of each other. And it really stuck with me, really, and in a way that I really didn't expect a Christopher Nolan film to do, in the sense that he's treating war as it is. Heroism in war is, as we've mentioned before, absolutely happens. But I think, and I don't know this for sure, but given the casualties in all wars, and particularly for the sake of this aspect of the discussion, the Second World War, there are far more people that die before they can make any impact on the war, right? And the way he presents that idea in Dunkirk is with these lads who are climbing on top of each other. They are literally all out to save themselves, and that's not. He's not criticising them.
No.
He's treating human beings as human beings. Human beings, all of them, in fight or flight, in a situation where it is pure fucking flight. There's no fight.
No, God, no.
It just really stuck out to me, and I think it was more representative of the whole film, the whole experience of the movie. It wasn't... Obviously, people would say any kind of sacrifice is heroic, which is, fair enough.
Of course,
But I think... the way that Nolan plays with that in Dunkirk, I think, is far more effective. The deployment of that idea is this. So many of these people are just young lads who are thrust in this situation, and I mean, at that point of the war, they're fighting a incredibly well-oiled, incredibly well-trained and equipped war machine. And they're getting battered. They're not ready. I mean, a lot of these countries in Europe were so shell-shocked and horrified by the impact of the First World War that a lot of the equipment and training and even the sizes of the armies in Europe was just so far behind the Germans because they were so scared about doing it again. So this idea that these men undertrained, under-equipped, and they're thrust into this situation where they're fighting a superior enemy. And I don't know, I just felt like it was a much fairer representation of what war would really be like for the vast majority of the average Joe. There's going to be the occasional guy who stands on the hill and goes, this way, and leads everyone. But I think they're in the minority compared to the vast majority of people who maybe, of course, feel a sense of duty, but they're also scared. And, the film handles that really well.
Yeah, I agree. I think the moment where that kind of hits home for me is bizarrely the bit where Kenneth Branagh standing on the mole.
Yeah.
And he's just like, fucking hell, you can practically see it from here, right?
Yeah.
And they're just looking for England.
Yeah, that really got me as well.
Yeah.
We both sort of said we're not, wouldn't class myself as someone that's hugely patriotic. Of course I have things that I like about England, and I'm fairly proud of it, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah.
But that really got me.
Yeah.
Even as someone that wouldn't sort of describe myself as a patriot,
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm glad. Yeah, interesting you point that out.
I just love that moment because it goes back to what you were saying before about the lack of someone standing on a hill saying this way. That's exactly what he's not doing. He's just looking at it through binoculars and being like, "Fucking, do I have a way out of this?
Yeah,
I don't know. Like I'm not going to pretend. I'm not going to say to like tens of thousands of British soldiers, "Don't you worry, everything will be fine." You can tell that he doesn't know. And the whole concept of Dunkirk is based on a military defeat as well, I think. Like, it was a colossal defeat. Like, in terms of... I mean, the spirit was not a... I think Nolan might have said something to this effect, actually. He said, like, I was making a film about a retreat, not a yay for us kind of moment. I mean, it's fucking lucky we got the amount of soldiers off that beach that we did. And I think that's the only time in which he acknowledges some kind of success is that, right at the end when I was about to say Finn Wolfhard. It's not Finn Wolfhard, it's Finn something else who plays the main character in Dunkirk. When he's on the train, that's the only time when he kind of brings forth the idea that there's some scraps of success with Dunkirk.
Yeah, saving the lives is the success.
Yeah.
And I guess, the fact that so many civilians risk their lives to save many others. I mean, that is obviously worthy of of acknowledgement and definitely. the heroism, the hero accolade. Also interesting the way, because obviously it wasn't just British soldiers on the beach, there were French. I think there were other nationalities. I can't quite remember, but I mean they're not allowed on. It's the British soldiers on first. That's again, another interesting aspect, which I think they explore quite well, is we're all in this together, but we're getting our boys off first. You French can wait. It's like, well, we fought and died together, and yet, it shouldn't be about that.
No, that's a curious.
But I just think the film. I think you're right, and it's strange, even though obviously historically Dunkirk is a defeat. I'd not quite considered the emphasis on that in the film.
I always thought it was about just a complete defeat, which is odd for a Nolan film because his films aren't chiefly concerned with that theme, really.
No.
They're not necessarily concerned with success either. Like, it's more of a grey area I think they occupy.
Yeah.
But there's always usually a more overt moment in the film where you think, okay, everything's going to be all right. Like the end of Inception, the spinning top kind of judders slightly.
Yeah, but
I mean, the Dark Knight Rises right where he lifts that glass of wine up in Italy and he's like, don't worry, I'm okay.
Studio notes. I swear, man, that's got to be it.
Completely,
yeah. And again, I think if we're going to talk about technique, the film is beautifully shot.
Yeah.
And the sound design is probably the best for. I mean, Nolan films, don't always have the best sound design.
No.
Let's be honest. But here, the way he uses sound, almost in a discordant, heightened fashion, works here. Particularly with the Stukas.
Yeah, God.
Because the Stuka, I mean, this is sort of a bit of an aside, but that's not part of the engine, is it? It's actually built. It's like they built that into the plane to make that noise to terrify people.
Oh, right. Okay. There you go.
It's all about that psychological. And they really tap into that when they're on the beach and the Stukas are just strafing the beach. It's just a massacre. And but the sound design, it's actually... I mean, I'm really annoyed at myself. I didn't actually see it in the cinema.
Oh, okay.
I remember my friend saying, you have to see it in the cinema. And I know a lot of people say that. And I heard that quite a lot. And for some reason, I just didn't. And I watched it at home. and it still got me. The sound design
yeah.
was still... It's a really essential part of the themes that we're just talking about. The idea of fear, the idea of a lack of heroism, and the idea of defeat. The sound of those Stukas punctuates each of those themes really well, I think.
Yeah. It's funny because, dialogue isn't a big part of Dunkirk.
No, it isn't. Yeah, you're
Quite
right.
often that's where his sound design... I'm not saying Nolan himself designs the sound for the film, but he definitely fucking stands on, next to them.
Yeah.
And says, turn up the bass and turn down the dialogue. It doesn't matter in Dunkirk because the dialogue's superfluous anyway. It's all about the actions, and it's all about, like you say, the soldiers clambering over each other, and when the German soldiers start... target practice on the boat, right? And they think they're getting shot at, and they're not saying anything.
Yeah,
they're just whimpering, and obviously they would be screaming if it wasn't for the proximity. I didn't think about the sound design in Dunkirk. I'd love to give it another watch on my superior television. The last time I watched it was on a laptop, I think. So,
oh wow, that is.
I did see it in the cinema, but the second time was on a little tinny laptop.
Oh wow, there we go. Yeah. The modern spectatorship of cinema, right?
Yeah.
I remember weirdly. This is a real aside, but on that sort of tangent, my mate really liked Once Upon a Time. You might be listening actually. Hello, Ollie. He bought Once Upon a Time in America on Blu-ray.
Oh yeah,
and they gave a code to watch it on your phone. So watch a ridiculously long. I don't know how long is that film, but the extended cut's 5 hours or something, and you're watching it on your phone. What the fuck? What a waste of your time to do that. But it's just strange that they would offer it, and there's a picture of it on the phone, like a fucking. Anyway,
it's bizarre.
It is weird. But no, I think the sound is really important in the film, visually as well. I mean, the shots of the Spitfire. I think that's probably the only time the film gets a bit flag wavy, because the Spitfire, of course, is an icon, isn't it? It's the iconography of the Spitfire.
That's RUF then. It's not RUF.
The RUF.
That's the African conflict. RAF.
It's a symbol of British defiance. British ingenuity, engineering. So it's sort of, I don't know, maybe if Nolan's intent was to use that as sort of levity in the film. But even still, I didn't necessarily mind it for some reason. And again, I'm not the kind of person who whacks off over that sort of stuff, but
I'm not an aviation enthusiast at all, but and I actually do think
just windmills.
Wind turbines, mate.
Wind turbines. Yeah.
Windmills are all right.
Yeah.
No, I do think that that was the weakest section of the film. Actually, the air, because it's the air, it's the land, and it's the sea, isn't it? There's three. The sea was really riveting, and most sort of I hesitate to use the phrase action-packed, but it was the most tense and nail-biting, fast-paced. The beach scenes on the land on the mole were the most kind of subdued and reflective, and then I do think this air was sort of awkwardly placed somewhat.
You're right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Great little ending when it lands.
And he burns the. I think it's a Spitfire. It could be a Hurricane. I don't know.
I think
actually shot more planes down, didn't it? The Hurricane.
Oh really?
The Hawk Hurricane. Yeah, more than Spitfire. There you go. So it could be.
Yeah.
Research.
I've got a feeling it might have been a Spitfire. I don't know. I know they crashed a real Spitfire for the
Did
film.
they?
Yeah.
Did they build it and crash it?
I think.
Because surely if they crashed an actual Spitfire,
I might be right.
Daily Mail would be
all over it, mate. I've got a feeling they did.
I seem to remember. Do you know what? It's funny. It's sort of. I was about to say erecting. It's giving me an erection.
Yeah.
No, it's bringing back a memory. I don't know what the word was. It was similar to erection. Maybe I'm just thinking about it.
Insurrection. No.
Just hearing you talk about World War II planes just gets me going, Ben.
I might be getting it confused with Tenet, in which they did crash a real plane, although it wasn't a Spitfire, it was a passenger jet. So maybe I'm wrong. Should have done my research. It's been a busy week.
Busy week, yeah. Let us off. Come
on. I don't know how it compares to 1917. Then I hold both films I hold in quite high regard. I think I actually do agree with you in a sense in that Dunkirk comes up on top.
Okay.
But actually, if someone said to me, "Do you want to watch 1917 or do you want to watch Dunkirk?" Depends on what mood I'm in, but I might actually, just for sort of viewing pleasure purposes and more even like escapism a little bit, I would probably choose 1917, you know.
Do you know what? I think that's interesting in the sense of what we were talking about earlier in regards to the film being more palatable.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And I think there's something more palatable about
Yeah,
about 1917, and maybe that speaks more to what we to the idea of war films in general and how we consume war films in the sense that we don't want to be reminded that it's all shit. They obviously are. But
and if you are watching a war film, in theory, you should be expecting those kinds of things.
I would hope so. Yeah. And again, that's where my problem lies. But I don't necessarily begrudge people who would probably choose that for the easier ride.
Yes, it is an easier ride.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
for sure. There you go.
I mean, I think by the tone of how I've talked about both films, you can tell I much prefer Dunkirk.
Yeah.
Just for that. I mean, again, there are films that go far deeper into that unflinching portrayal of warfare.
But
I think it's interesting to talk about both these films together because they're both films that came out within close proximity to each other, and they're also films that have, thematically quite similar, and I think they're just compared a lot, and I think it was interesting to sort of weigh them up.
Yeah.
So obviously we could talk about how there's other films from other eras and other countries. So we've already mentioned Come and See, which is probably the most harrowing war film you'll ever see.
Jesus, yeah.
But to compare it to those two films, it would obviously you can because they're war films. But for the context of comparison, it would be unfair, maybe because Come and See is fucking way above both of these movies.
Yeah,
these films also, both of them, 1917 and Dunkirk, are mainstream entertainment films as well.
They are, yeah.
So that's why I think there's an additional layer of why they've been put together and why they're often compared.
Yeah.
Because they're seen by the same circles.
Yeah, completely.
Whereas I'd wager Come and See probably wouldn't pull people in as much.
No.
Unless you want to have like an auditory and visual bombardment that genuinely leaves you mortified for about a week after watching it.
Yeah.
But which is the point, and I think it should be the point of war films.
Yeah.
So that's why for me it's probably the best. Let's move on then to some of keeping those themes in mind.
Yeah.
Heroism and
horror.
What films stand out to you in the presentation of either positive or negative? See, we sort of talked about a couple of films before, didn't we?
Yes. So I've got one to start off with, which I feel like toes the line with both. It's an American film, although directed by Sam Mendes, British director of 1917.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So it's it's Jarhead.
Yeah.
About the Gulf War.
Okay.
Which was a curious addition to the kind of the war film collection in that it's about a war that was by and large pretty dull and boring. There's a lot less focus on like ground troops. So it was the 90s, I think it took place. So it was a lot more aerial warfare and a lot more sort of tactical bombing and sort of fighter jets and stuff. The war sort of not to say that it wasn't fought on the ground.
There were some ground battles.
But they were a lot more few and far between. And this Jarhead focuses, I think, on a group of bored soldiers, basically.
Right, okay.
It has its problems, Jarhead. It's not a perfect film at all. The ending, a lot like another film we're going to discuss, is confusing and a bit weird. And, it does sort of dilute the message of it a bit. But there's one scene that really jumps out at me, in that it's a kind of gun-ho American soldier looking at the planes overhead, and he's like, we're going to smoke them, right? He's like, yeah, and he's like, hold on a minute, they're coming the wrong way. And he's like, hold on. And you can just see all of this sort of American hairy chestiness just disappear from his face, and you realise it's an instance of friendly fire. And I like that the film sort of acknowledges that did happen. That is, as tactical and as sort of thought out as these can be, there's gonna be instances of friendly fire. And there's another moment at the end which is just gold, I think. Jake Gyllenhaal just after basically the war's over, right at the end, he almost shoots someone, and then they call in a fucking airstrike, and you can see all this pent up rage and sort of anger that happens quite a lot with soldiers in the way they've been recruited. They've basically been recruited
to kill.
And they're like, you're gonna get to shoot people, right? And it's going to be like
Sort
a
of like
video
Full Metal
game.
Jacket.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
actually think Full Metal Jacket does it a lot better, and Jarhead is a bit derivative of it.
Okay.
But there's a moment at the end where he's looking around him and all these soldiers are celebrating and dancing, and he's like, I never shot my rifle. And there's just that moment of just, they were convinced they were going to be heroes, right? And they're not, because they haven't done anything. They haven't contributed to this, to the war effort at all. They're just there as almost a backup plan if everything goes tits up.
Yeah.
That's what I always thought that struck me as odd about Jarhead. In that. But at the same time, there are a lot of moments in the film which do subscribe to the American flag waving that is odd. It's like the screenplay was written by two different people. One of them a pacifist and the other one a kind of pro-military,
Like a
guy.
jingoist.
Yes, absolutely.
Pacifist and a jingoist, sort
Yeah,
of kind of like wrestling for control over the sort of key themes of the screenplay.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've not considered it. I mean, I watched the film a very, very long time ago before I really got into movies, so
Yeah.
I can't really remember what I thought about it. But I really like the idea of the bored soldiers and the ideas of heroism that they're drunk on,
Yes.
and heroism through violence.
Yeah.
That they never quite get to realise.
No, they never do.
And there's something troubling about that inherently. But and the fact that they don't get to do that is also, you know, a comment about, I don't know, I guess how like warfare is changing.
Yeah, and how it can be really excessive as well.
And how it's yeah.
I think the American military might perhaps have a problem with over recruitment. And you know,
maybe.
like their interest in having a permanent standing army is baffling to me. Considering they've got nukes and stuff, you're just like, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not, mate. I shouldn't weigh in on these issues. I have absolutely no idea. But like, yeah, it's bizarre to me that notion, the continued cycle of recruitment and having, you know, the idea that you're going to be doing. Like an almost Call of Duty level every other weekend. You know?
Yeah.
I think,
Well, it's interesting you say that, and I think obviously, we might be wading into territory that isn't really familiar to us, as we often do in Cinema Boys to Cinema, often to our detriment. But I think there is something in that, in the notion of how society values the military and how we view a standing army and the importance of the standing army.
Yeah.
I think I always find that the idea of really keeping a standing army and being really sort of emphatically behind everything they do, I find that just chilling. Personally.
Yeah, completely.
But interesting. I'm going to stay with the theme of bored soldiers, or frustrated soldiers.
Yeah.
It's funny, I didn't actually consider this film until you said that, and I've got the DVD right here in front of me because I want to show you it.
Yeah.
Hear that?
There we go.
Oh, that's the problem. I'm going to change that live here.
Oh, mate, the disc has fallen out.
The disc
of the
is
tray.
falling out. It's so annoying when that happens.
Yeah, it seems to happen out of nowhere.
I know, just collector problems.
Yeah.
This is a film called GI Samurai.
Okay.
And it's Sonny Chiba. So Sonny Chiba is essentially the Japanese equivalent of Bruce Lee.
Right. Yeah.
Who's in, essentially is in lots of different films from like the sort of 60s and 70s and 80s. There's Sister Street Fighter series, and you get the Executioner series, and but he's also, aside from being in like quite violent action or martial arts films, he's also been in quite a lot of like sort of grubby exploitation films, detective police dramas. So he's an actor that's got quite a lot of strings to his bow, and I think he shows regularly that he's far more than just a martial artist.
Yeah. Okay.
GI Samurai basically focuses on what is called the Japanese Defence Force, isn't it? The Japanese Army, I think.
I think so, yeah.
And they're on training exercises, and in the modern day, or was then the modern day. And then a bizarre instance transpires. It's like this sort of kaleidoscopic, trippy time travel sequence, and this group of soldiers with all this technology go back in time.
Oh, wow.
They go back in time to feudal Japan.
Right.
So and I think it's the Sengoku period of Japan, which is a sort of famous for being a time of like political, social upheaval, a lot of war, a lot of instability.
Yeah.
And what basically happens is that these men who are a part of the Japanese Defence Force end up becoming embroiled in this feudal conflict with modern weaponry.
Right. Oh man. Okay.
So it sounds like a really sort of
sort of Army of Darkness. Almost.
Yeah. It sounds like like a sort of Sam Raimi, sort of Japanese equivalent of Sam Raimi, but it's actually like a really fiercely it's a very fierce anti-war film. It sort of channels that sort of. Look at
Let's have a look. Yeah.
It's sort of, it's again, my knowledge on this area of history isn't particularly strong, so forgive me if I'm talking shit here. But I think it channels that frustration because obviously Japan was still in this period of its military being completely subdued by Western powers after the Second World War. So obviously when the Japanese surrendered, they had to reduce the size of their army hugely. Which fits quite interestingly into the context of what we were discussing earlier in relation to Jarhead and this sort of idea about having a standing army. Is that it's almost part of national pride and national identity. And in here, it's sort of presented as this idea that it's almost like they've had their balls cut off.
Right.
And there's this sort of inherent national frustration. It's not all shared by everybody, obviously, but by the sort of traditional ideas of the country and its people. And the soldiers embody that frustration.
Okay.
Then they exercise this frustration in an era where obviously they're fighting people with bows and arrows and samurai swords.
Oh, man, yeah.
And it sounds like really wacky, but it actually becomes quite a sort of like, there's a lot of arresting imagery and quite sad moments that you just wouldn't like. There's like tanks rolling through all these. It's like the battle scenes are massive.
Really?
There's like samurai and arrows like flying in the sky, and the tanks and helicopters and stuff. It's really it must have been a fucking like ball ache to shoot. But yeah, I just think it's really worth putting out as a film. It's very little known. I only sort of chanced upon it when I was going through a big Sonny Chiba binge, and I kept buying his films on Blu-ray and DVD where possible, and this just came up.
Oh man, okay.
And it's a real hidden gem. I think this is what you would call a hidden gem.
G.I. Samurai.
I often fantasize if I ever became a sort of merited screenwriter, this would be the film I would follow up with.
Oh right, okay.
I'd buy the rights to this straight away and do one about the the English Civil War.
Oh really?
Yeah,
that's quite a good idea actually.
But, don't steal it.
No. His intellectual property. Yeah. He's written the screenplay and he's sent it back to himself. It's copyrighted.
yeah. Don't take it.
Oh wow, okay, that's interesting. I need to watch that. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, it's a really interesting film. Not only for the way it sort of broaches the message of the anti-war message by going backwards, even further backwards into a period, but it also it takes that anti-war message in something that is quite inherently quite wacky and makes it feel like really, really sort of emotionally and intellectually involving in a way that I was really genuinely surprised by. So yeah, really worth a go.
Brilliant.
If you can get it. Was really hard to find. The DVD was quite expensive. So.
Yeah, it looks like quite a...
But yeah, worth a go.
Lovely.
I'll mention it.
So, I kind of want to briefly talk about The Hurt Locker. I don't want to delve into it too much because I don't think I have an awful lot to say about it, but we were discussing this briefly earlier, and I really didn't see that much merit in this film when I watched it.
It was really cleared up, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was one of those films that when it came out, everyone was talking about it.
Yeah.
Everyone loved it.
Yep.
And so did the awards, the Oscars. They loved
it. One Oscar. Catherine Bigelow won, I think.
Did it win a few? Or am I just...
I think it won 4 or 5.
Yeah. I mean, I got the impression it cleared out.
Yeah, I never got on with it. I just thought, and I never quite could put my finger on why that was. I thought, and you kind of... Earlier on, you sort of illustrated it quite well in that the ending is so bizarre. Yeah. And you're right, I didn't think about it in that way, but the message of that film just gets really muddled in that ending of, obviously the film is, by and large, you think it's focusing more on the horror, and it's a specific film. It's about a bomb disposal and the kind of tension that derives from that. It does do the tension quite well, but
yeah, it's a well-made movie.
Yeah, but I remember thinking it was a bit sort of wafer thin, almost in the way that it kind of in its central message, it just was really muddled and unfocused. So and when you mentioned the ending with that, I'm kind of really paraphrasing you now.
No,
but the ending with that rock music, him in that supermarket being miserable, and then going back to the Middle East and him being back in his bomb suit in that big sort of huge
and the metal soundtrack.
It's so bizarre,
fucking ridiculous.
Yeah. Odd. So a confusing way to deal with horror and heroism.
Really incongruent mix, I thought, in that movie. I mean, I didn't dislike the film. I thought it was just a fairly average war movie. I didn't come away from feeling especially moved
Yeah.
Nor did I feel. I mean, again, I think it's always going to be a hard ass getting a hard ass.
Yeah.
It's always going to be a bit of a hard ass.
Yeah.
No, it's always going to be a hard ass getting me G'd up and enthusiastic for any conflict.
Yeah.
I think you're right. That sort of muddled nature of presenting the trauma of war, the difficulty of war, and the aspect of sort of this sort of adrenaline junkie side of it. Brenda's character. Clearly, there's something in what he's doing, and I guess history is littered with people that do seem bizarrely well suited to that way of life, and I think the film tries to explore that in different guises. But I just think the ending is atrocious. I think whatever sort of emotional connection I had with the character, and indeed the themes of the film, which was pretty minimal anyway for the reasons you've mentioned, gets absolutely shat out of the fucking window with that sequence. I remember thinking, is this a joke? It's as bad, and it's not as criminal in this film because this film's a ridiculous sci-fi. The use of what's that fucking song at the end of Edge of Tomorrow? I need to know now. I was like, what the fuck's that about? But that didn't bother me as much because it's a fucking sci-fi film. A pretty good one, I might add.
Oh, I like that.
But I was like, what? But here, it's just like all of the sort of like meaningful or attemptedly meaningful mediations on the things we've just discussed. He likes bombs and war. Ding! I was like, fucking hell, that is dreadful.
Weird.
And misguided for someone like Catherine Bigelow.
Yeah, I don't like Zero Dark 30 either, actually.
No, I don't.
Maybe I missed the point, but I thought it was just the pro-torture stuff at the beginning put me off massively. Maybe it wasn't pro-torture, and maybe there was some nuance to it that I didn't understand. But too long. I like Jessica Chastain as an actress. I think she's really accomplished.
Fantastic. Yeah,
and she plays I think Catherine Bigelow likes obsession with stuff. Right? Even like Point Break, they have the sort of adrenaline junkies.
That's a good point. Actually,
yeah. So she's got something to touch on in all of her films, but didn't like that one either.
No, I agree with you about the Hurt Locker.
Crazy.
Yeah. Moving on then, I think we'll go for one more. I was trying to pick, because I think we've sort of, obviously, there's a lot of heavy hitters, but I want to talk about MASH.
Oh, okay. Yeah, good.
Robert Altman.
Yeah.
A war film that obviously set during Vietnam, which we haven't talked about.
No, yeah, quite a key conflict, especially in cinema.
I mean, it's arguably, some of the most well-acknowledged, some of the most widely acknowledged war films as the best war films of Vietnam. Films, aren't they, really?
I think the fact that they have nice sunsets in Vietnam helps. So it looks quite nice on the screen.
What strikes me so much about the film is it starts off as this sort of zany, wacky. I mean, I've not seen the series, so I mean that might probably inform my understanding of it a lot more. But the film it sort of really explores the sort of wackiness of the war and the conflict, and you talk about that idea of people sort of sat around being bored.
It's
almost a bit like that in MASH, and the sort of wild shit they get up to, and it really focuses on, because I think one of the aspects of the war in Vietnam that a lot of people don't really acknowledge, and I didn't till really recently, was the amount of resistance within the military towards the conflict.
Oh, okay.
We all think about like the hippie movement or the rise of the hippie movement, and the home movements that put considerable pressure on the administration at the time to stop the war, but there was actually a lot of people within the military that didn't fight. There were whole units of soldiers that refused. Boats got taken over in the Navy.
Oh my god!
Some really famous cases of like a few huge vessels in the Navy being commandeered by people that just didn't want to fight.
Oh, okay,
and sailing them off and doing crazy shit. There's also a thing called fragging, which is where particularly disliked members of the military hierarchy, who were often the arbiters of missions where a lot of people died, were killed by American soldiers. It's called fragging.
Shit.
Hundreds. There's record. And this is stuff I had no idea about. And I knew there was like a lot of, again, a lot of my relationship with that aspect of the war was from movies like Apocalypse Now, which is a pretty overt representation of that. That sort of the craziness of the war and the sort of
it's just excess, isn't it?
The excess of the war and the resistance to the war offset against the old school American values of the war. MASH really channels that. I mean, again, it's played for comedy. A lot of it really funny comedy as well. I mean, I think it's down to a lot of the cast who are excellent. But then the film shifts.
And
it does become about the horrors of war. and the impact of that horror.
Yeah.
I'm sort of underselling it because it has been a while since I've seen it, but I just wanted to talk about it in that context because it encapsulates a lot of those ideas. In the same, you could say like something like Good Morning Vietnam.
Okay. Yeah.
Also explores as well.
Yeah.
This idea of subversion within the military and something that really isn't explored a great deal in terms of discussions around Vietnam.
No. I mean,
because I only was made aware of it recently. Just had the extent of that wide subversive behaviour that was conducted within the military. I mean, the fact that, like I said, boats stolen, whole military units not fighting.
That's crazy.
The prisons overflowing with people that refused to fight. Military prisons and and generals and sergeants or high-ranking officers being killed or threatened.
Right. Okay.
So
in that sense, in that kind of the chaotic nature of that. Do you think then that the MASH film took all that and sort of almost warped it into a farce, right? Which is what a lot of the soldiers thought that the whole ideology of the war was.
I think so. I think it really channels the sort of the stupidity of it and the silliness of war. And I think the shift to a more serious tone is all the more gut punching because of the way it initially presents those ideas.
Yeah.
So I think Altman's a fucking phenomenal filmmaker. He's one of the greats, right, for a reason. And it's a very deliberate decision in the film to set up all these ideas and have a lot of goofy zaniness.
Yeah.
At points you sort of forget you're watching a war movie. It's quite strange, and it's all done in his sort of classic way. What I love so much about Altman is that sort of way, his sound design and the busyness of his films. His films are always so busy.
It's
like cacophonous sound design, and it's within that you pick the little details out of what he's trying to do through the little noises and the little exchanges.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. I think you're right, and I think it's really worth the go. I keep meaning to check the series out. I'm not sure if it'll be sort of lost on me.
We had it at home. We had it on DVD. My mum really got on with the series.
Okay.
It seemed like, because I've never liked Dad's Army. I've thought it was
okay. Yeah.
I never got on with it. I don't know what it was. There's something that really rubs you up the wrong way. That sort of Britishness. That sort of
There's a lot of comedies that were very similar in that era.
Yeah.
Whilst I can understand the reverence, I sort of get what you mean.
Yeah. No, completely. I do understand why people do get behind it as well. But I always remember thinking when like MASH was playing, I remember thinking that's funnier than Dad's Army. Like that's a lot funnier. The Americans have done war comedy so much better.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
I set the cat amongst the pigeons.
Yeah. Just throw that in there, see what happens.
Yeah.
Don't like it, mate. Deal with it. I think I wanted to briefly talk about. And this film is centered around a very specific occurrence that is essential in war and warfare, and that's the arms dealership, effectively.
Oh yes.
So Lord of War, Nicolas Cage, not a perfect film at all. Like a lot of problems actually. It's really trite. It's really obvious in what it's trying to say.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you try and convey horror and like the horrors of war, but you end up just saying something really obvious. Just being like, war is shit. We know. But there are some really good moments in that film. And one particular scene I want to point out is it's right at the end. Spoilers ahead. Go and watch Lord of War. Not perfect, but worth a go. Worth a stab. Like a good, decent 2 hours of a good Nicolas Cage performance. Anyway, at the end of the film, arms dealer Nicolas Cage finally gets caught by Ethan Hawke.
Oh yeah,
and he's pursued by him this entire film.
Okay, I forgot he's in it.
Yeah, and so like Nicolas Cage's character's life has fallen apart. His wife's left him. Everything's crumbled around him. The only thing he has left is what he's good at, and that's selling guns, right? And he's been caught. So, but it's weird. You kind of look at him. You're like, you're not reacting dreadfully to this at all. And there's this moment at the end where he says to Ethan Hawke directly to his face, someone's going to come in here in a minute and tell me that I'm going to be released. And the reason for that is because America needs me just as much as America's enemies need me. So he sells guns to fucking everyone, right?
Right, okay.
And it just, like, whilst the majority of the film is, like, really, really obvious in its message, that bit hits home for me. I think that, like, it does convey the ultimate theme of the morality of funding killing, basically, and how he's just... He sells it to... the Americans need his guns just as much as the opposition need his guns, and it just sort of sells that... the realisation that he's not actually a criminal at all. Whilst he's portrayed as a criminal throughout the majority of the film, right at the end you realise, like, oh no, he's on everyone's side. Not perfect, as I say, but interesting little movie. I like it. There's got a good opening sequence as well. There's like a the life of a bullet.
Oh
it's quite cool.
The credit sequence.
Yeah. It's got all of that. It's got that song, which is in a lot of war films.
No, it's interesting. I'd not considered it in that context. I guess it speaks to the idea of how wars are manufactured, how conflict is manufactured.
Yeah, man.
By dominant powers. I mean, again, I'm not saying this from the perspective of our home country not doing it. Of course it did, but Americans are very much known for stirring the pot.
Yeah,
in many different countries. If you think about their involvement during the Cold War, for instance, in Latin America, propping up fascist dictatorships like Pinochet. Purely to sort of fight that, roll back the communist sphere of influence.
Yeah, it's weird how transparent they are in terms of like them being very self-interested sometimes.
Yeah, and it's just there. The history is there. You can clearly see that they have done that. And to the point in which, at the end of Lord of the War, they end up releasing a criminal, a war criminal who is responsible for the deaths of like millions of American soldiers. Purely because ultimately it doesn't matter, they need him. There's no morality there at all. It's it's all about the cash, the dollars, cash, as it were. Yeah, the American military industrial complex.
Yeah,
yeah, man. Yeah, no, that's Lord of War. It's funny. You can write that film off in the sense that it is clearly made mostly for entertainment purposes, I think.
Yeah, it follows the kind of Goodfellas model. Rise and Fall, and by extension, Citizen Kane, that kind of thing. It's very ordinary in that respect. It's got a really good soundtrack, actually. There's a lot to love about Lord of War if you're willing to, accept that it's not very nuanced.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I'd not considered that element, this sort of that end sequence.
Yeah. Jared Leto gets shot in it as well. So
oh, yes, he does, doesn't he?
Yeah. Cool. Real quickly, wind turbine research. Wind turbines were invented in 1896 by Winslow Turbine.
Oh, really?
No.
Oh, okay. You could have fooled me. Yeah.
Winslow Turbine. I love the idea that they were named after a guy and not what their function.
Yeah. I fell for it.
There you go.
Outro.
Questing the cinematic void.
So there we have it then.
Hey, there he is. Yeah, enjoyed that.
Yeah, no,
I always enjoy it. Why else would we do this? It was good to dig into that. It's a genre that I haven't thought about in quite a while.
Yeah, it's on a par with horror films in that, in a very simplistic level. Why do you enjoy them? They're filled with horrendous stuff, but and I'm not saying for a second that I take delight in watching atrocities unfold, but there is something to be said about how popular war films can be, and in the context that they're displaying something which is overtly horrific, right? And it's probably sometimes they're a recruitment tool, I guess, and sometimes they are sort of art pieces that are
more reflective.
Yeah, and more sort of from a pacifist's perspective. And sometimes a bit of both.
I mean, it's interesting, actually, just before we talk about the war film we're going to cover next week, I saw a really interesting article about how Marvel films are tied quite deeply, quite in bed with the United States military.
Oh, really?
Particularly like Captain Marvel, which they actually made a recruitment ad with Brie Larson for the Air Force. Yeah.
Fuck. Oh, yeah, I think I remember that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think they're probably in bed with a lot of these big studios more than we realise. And as a recruitment tool, I mean, Marvel would be a pretty good place to go, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Just everybody watches them.
Top Gun as well. They had stations outside of cinemas, basically trying to induct people into the United States. Is it United States Air Force?
Yeah.
No, yeah. which is baffling to me. I didn't find that out quite recently. It's Top Gun.
It's just strange, isn't it, that you're going to watch a film that's a case of Top Gun. I haven't seen the new one, actually, but the idea that you would go and watch this film, which is obviously a fanciful portrayal of this way of life.
Yeah. Not everyone can.
And then you'd come out and think, oh, yeah, I'm going to go straight and sign up. That's weird.
It is odd. Yeah. Bizarre.
Maybe it's just we're not of that inclination.
Maybe not, no.
Again, we'd be in the bin.
Yeah.
Okay, so next week, Return to Seoul.
Yes.
A film by director Davy Chow. A film that seems to focus a lot on the search for identity.
Yeah.
A film that, again, whilst we were together in the watershed, eating Skittles.
Yeah.
The tropical flavour, interesting.
Nice, very nice.
Yeah, I enjoyed.
Not sponsored.
Not sponsored yet.
No.
That's what I quite like about the watershed is that we'll go and watch one film and then we'll see a trailer and be like, we need to cover that.
Yeah,
and you just feel like you have to cover it because of the trailer.
Yeah,
that happened with The Beast, didn't it?
It did, yeah.
So, looking forward to covering that in the next episode. I know we mentioned Blaxploitation.
Yeah.
Stars aren't aligned yet, but they will. I promise you it won't be long before we're talking all things Danny Dyer. Yeah. But until that happens, you're going to have Soul.
Yes, or a return to it.
A return to it. Yes.
Yeah, that will be Blaxploitation's still on the cards, 100%. Looking forward to it, but as and when.
Yeah, I feel like we're just so excited about it. Like we just keep mentioning it, but it will come because it's just an opportunity to talk about something that is really fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes, Return to Seoul next week. In the meantime, have a good one, and we'll catch you in the next one.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.